I think, we've talked about this with countless classes that have come through. And, I think, let's count success at your 20th reunion. So let's count success of the impact that you're going to make in this world, you know, on other people. How, are you going to enhance this world? Are you going to make it a better place? And how are you going to do that? I think uh, time and time again, like there are going to be races that you remember. There's going to be like that one race that you remember. You aren't going to remember all these races. Come on, we all know that. Like racing is awesome when you're in it and exciting when you're in it. But 20 years out, when you have a family and kids and a life and a career and there are so many things that are more important. And maybe, just maybe, one or two of those lessons that you learned in our boat bay is going to help carry you through a really tough time in your life, a really stressful time. Maybe, just maybe, the people that you have established relationships with are going to be there for you when you really need them.
All right. Well, let's jump in. You ready?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, for everyone listening, we have Coach Will Porter from Yale University Women's Rowing, who generously took time out of his week as they prepare for NCAA Championships literally this weekend. I think today is Monday, Memorial Day, and they load up and get ready to embark on Mercer Lake this week, and I'm incredibly excited. Coach Porter, really appreciate you taking the time to hop on and with your success with your going on, or I guess 3 decades at Yale, coming up on 3 decades at Yale and your time there. And I'm very excited to just for the athletes and the coaches and the parents who are listening to learn a little bit from you. But Coach Porter, with that being said, just it's Monday. You guys load up and head down to Mercer from Yale this week. NCAA Championships. I think if I'm not mistaken, you guys are the 7th seed. Just to kick things off before we dive into a little bit about your background, your coaching experience, and how you got into this and started this journey, what is the messaging like this week? What is the, as you kind of talk to the team, talk to your coaches, and, again, Friday is going to be here before we know it. Like, what does that look like as you load up for this week in the national championships as a pretty high ranked team?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me. I love these podcasts. I think they're really valuable for our sport and just, spreading the word and spreading information. For us, this is week 39, so of our year, and we always know week 39 is the week that we head into NCAAs. And so much of the work is done at this point. We've been training for a long time, to get to this point. It's a culmination, if you will. There's not a lot of, can't go back and recreate fitness. The fitness is what the fitness is. The skill set is what the skill set is for right now. You can always hone your skills as you go into a big event, make sure you're sharpened. But it's just about managing energy, managing expectations, and staying process oriented, not getting ahead of yourself. Don't start overthinking the result. Don't start worrying about the result. Just sit in it, enjoy it. We try to, one of our favorite sayings is how we live our days is how we live our lives. And, to sit in it and one practice at a time, one stroke at a time, and that's where we are at our best, when we're sitting right in it. So it's exciting. They probably have more energy than they've ever had all school year at this point. Walking upstairs is not a hard thing for them anymore, which it is probably on their daily when we're training. But yeah, it's taper time, it's performance time. And our sport is interesting because you spend so much time training and practicing, and that's one phase. And then there's the performance phase. And they're very different. One, practice and training is for performance, and performance is different. It's different set of skills. And luckily through the season, we have a series of races, regular season races. Then we have the Ivy Championship. And so we get to trial and error. We get to see what works, what doesn't work down the course, what works in our prep, what doesn't work in our prep, in our execution, how well we can manage say the third 500, how well we get off the blocks, how well we sit down on rate, and in some of these hot races, these top end varsity races, they become almost a sprint. So it's hard to make up ground, if you're not executing well, if you we like to call them empty strokes. If you have, say, 5 empty strokes, that could be the difference in a big race. So you try to minimize your empty strokes and make them all count and hit each phase of the race plan down the track. That's what we try to do right now.
I love that. And so like with, I guess, less than, or three, 4 practices remaining, is it kind of about working on that precision and the execution? Like, again, like you said, like the fitness is kind of set. The technique is for the most part probably set, but the boat cohesion can probably always be,
right.
Or, kind of being on the same script can always be refined. Is that kind of in your remaining few practices? I'm sure for you and probably other teams out there, it's more about, the execution piece of making sure that we limit those empty strokes. Is that kind of the focus over the next couple of days?
Yeah, I think, the thing about tapering and rowing, team boats, as opposed to, say, swimming or running, where you're an individual athlete, I think spending time in the boat, hands on oars, even though you're tapering, is important. Having that unity in the shell is important. Rest is important also. So it's how do you combine both? You rest but have hands on the shell. So the sessions are shorter, more energy, probably more focused, and just try to sharpen it up. The other thing is, again, in an 8 or even in a 4, you're trying to get 9 minds in one place or 5 minds in one place, and that's not automatic, and that varies day to day. Everybody's coming in from their busy days, and at this time of year, there's not that much going on. School is out. People are still balancing their regular lives, their relationships outside of rowing, their summer internships that are on the horizon, whatever they're doing. They have, their parents, their family, whatever there is in their life. And they have to have the ability to sort of check that when we come together and focus in on a common focus down the track of one focus and execute together. It's very tricky. I think that from the outside looking in, people think it's easy. You just get in the boat and you just haul on it and go down the track and just let it happen. But it's so much more that goes into it than that. And I think that's where good coaches, are able to bring a group together and get them to focus on the task at hand. That singular focus is really powerful when it comes together. And, that's one of the beauties of our sport. There's a lot of beauties, but that's one of the coolest things about rowing an 8 is when you all sort of hit that sweet spot and off you go.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. We're going to dive into that a little bit deeper as we continue our conversation, because I think it's a unique perspective because it is the week of the big race, right? The marquee event, kind of for a season, like you said, you're planning 39 weeks in advance for kind of this moment here as a team. This is the cap to the season, obviously. And with that, I wanted to kind of start with just a little bit about your coaching background, because I think one of the things I'm very interested in learning from you. So you started at Yale as the head coach, right? I think you did some time prior as an assistant coach, but 1999, and here we are in 2025. And so a long time kind of seeing the evolution of the sport of rowing, women's rowing, NCAA rowing, like just a lot of different phases of evolution, I'm sure. And we'll dive into that here in a second, because I am curious to you as you gear up for what is always competitive, NCAA championship. But before we even get to that, like, how did you get into coaching? Where did this all begin? Again, and then as you sit here today, in again this this next phase of the journey, of what's been a very long and successful journey. Like, how did you get into coaching, and where did this, where did you land on Yale? And just dive into a little bit about your background for people listening.
Okay. This could take a while. This could take our whole 5. Okay. So when I finished university, I wasn't done. I felt I wasn't done rowing. I wanted to keep rowing. And at that time, it was prior to the internet. Go figure. I mean, holy cow. So, I had been spending my summers down at Penn AC, rowing. Ted Nash was there running the program. And it was, a very vibrant program, of really the time when club rowing was up and running. There was no centralized national team. There were camps. Korzanowski would bring people together for camps. So through that, I sort of saw, Ted Nash had the straight four and the national team guys there. So I saw, oh, geez, maybe I should keep rowing. So I wanted to keep rowing. So in order to keep rowing, I had to make money. And so I was like, well, geez, how am I going to make money and train? So I thought, maybe I could try coaching. So yeah, I wrote about 20 letters, handwritten letters, and I sent them out to the coaches across the country, mostly the sprints league, because I rode at Rutgers. I went to Rutgers, and we used to be in the Eastern Sprints. And I got one response, and it was from Ken Dreyfus out at Stanford, and he hired me on to be like the third coach back then. So it was myself, John Pescatori, and Ken. John was the freshman heavyweight coach, and I was the varsity assistant coach. So I packed the car, drove out to California, and I was still training. John was active; he was training for the national team. There were some other guys out in California training, so it paid the bills. It allowed me to train. And that's how I started. And I had no intention of being a rowing coach. It was not my focus. It was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the U.S. team. And so the journey began. And, right at or about April or May of that spring, Ted Nash reached out and brought me back to race in what's called a speed order, and he paid my plane ticket. And back in those days, that was great because I had no money. So I was like, okay, free trip back east. So then my story in coaching is I just sort of kept getting offered jobs. Steve Wagner was nice enough to hire me at Rutgers to do the freshman heavyweight men there, which was a great setup because the national team was sort of working out of Princeton when they had a camp, and Penn AC was right down the road. So I was back and forth from Philly coaching the freshman heavyweights. I did that for 4 years. It was a blast. I really had a lot of fun, coaching at the school I went to, coaching the freshman heavyweight men and the program I rode in, and had a really fun time with that. And all the while I was training, I found that coaching made me a better athlete because I was thinking about the sport so much. I made the team. I rode on the U.S. team a couple of times, and then I unceremoniously quit rowing when I was kind of burnt on it. And at that time, I walked away from coaching. I got married right away and sort of spent a year in limbo. And Mike Vespoli, again, called me up because he knew I was in the area. I was back in Connecticut. He said, hey, come work for me. So I worked for Mike for a year, and that was really cool, learning how to build the boats. Back then, Vespoli was a big boat. It was probably used by 50% of the collegiate crews back then. So I worked in the shop, learned about the boats, really missed coaching. Next stop, Scott Armstrong had a job open, which I applied for up at Dartmouth. And I went up to Dartmouth to coach the freshman heavyweight men up there and had 2 great years with Scott. And Scott was a really innovative young coach, very good coach at that time. And I learned a ton from him. And then in my second year up there, Chris Wilson, who was the head coach at Yale for the women, I had known her because Chris had coached men at Yale when I was coaching men at Rutgers, and we used to compete against each other. And, I got to know her. And again, out of the blue phone call, hey, Will, we have a job open as assistant. And I was down at the IRAs. So I talked to her a little bit at the IRAs. And then I came for an interview. Now, I grew up in Connecticut. My wife grew up in Connecticut. And I was like, I don't know if I want to coach women at the time. I was a little hesitant because I hadn't done it before. And it was right at the beginning of it was the first year of NCAAs. So it was 96. And so there was a couple of things. Number one, it was going to pay me more than coaching at Dartmouth. So that was good. And number two, we wanted to start a family, and both sets of grandparents were in Connecticut. And so it kind of was logical. I guess the third thing was my wife was like, yeah, let's do this. So I was like, okay, let's do this. So I came down as the assistant coach for the women for 2 seasons with Chris. And when Chris left, I was hired interim for a year, sat interim for a year, and then our results were strong enough that they hired me on to be the head coach. And that's sort of my path. I always sort of say, um, I never set out to be a rowing coach, but over time, I really found my passion, and I really found that it fit me, and I fit it, and that was important. That it was something that I was good at, I enjoyed. I was able to get results, not just racing results, but positive effect on the young people I was working with. Built great relationships and things like that. So that was sort of the impetus to stay in it. And you blink, trust me, you blink, and here we are 25 years later as a head coach. I don't, I started when I was really young. That's the thing. but I got a lot more years in me, and and I'm learning more in my 25th year as a head coach than ever before. We got some sweet telemetry going in the boats this year. Used a new system called X-Boat, which is going to hit the market, this coming fall. It's an amazing system, and really sort of brought in another aspect of coaching for me, which was fun and exciting. Yeah, just keep evolving.
What just bridging off of that, like what are some, like, for you as a coach who has so much experience as a head coach at the highest level of college rowing and all that, like, out of curiosity for young coaches out there, like, what are your tips for, like, continuing to evolve your craft as a coach and as a leader? Whether that's, your high school coach who's, volunteering but wants to someday be a varsity or a, coach at a university or a full-time coach one day, or you're someone who's 10 to 15 years in. And like you said you're continuing to evolve, and, that could be both the skill of coaching and innovating with technology and things like that. What would be your tips? Just a quick question on that front. What would be your tips for coaches out there who are trying to take from someone who is very experienced in their craft, but is still in that growth mindset and continuing to evolve? What would be your take or your tips for those coaches, or any coach?
Yeah, I think when you first start out, everybody's different. So everybody's background is different. I was, I would say, humbly now, I would say I was supremely arrogant when I first started out. I was a national team guy. I knew rowing inside and out, and I thought I knew it all. And, I think some people come into it like that, and some people come into it a little bit more humble and learning. But I think, as a young coach, there's a couple of things that are really important, and it's that you have to find your voice. And so often, you as you come to it from being an athlete, so you start out maybe copying the stuff that your coach taught you, and maybe even using his or her expressions, that aren't really you, and so I see so many young coaches talking in a voice that's not theirs. It's somebody else's. They're trying to be Steve Gladstone, or they're trying to be Mike Tatey or something like that, and they're just not. And that's okay. You don't have to be. The best coaches are the ones who are themselves and have really come to understand the sport. That's sort of the beginning. Understanding the sport is the beginning, and then being able to communicate it to student athletes is huge. And then understanding your student athletes and understanding them holistically as human beings, and bringing them forward through a process at a time in their lives, whether they're high school kids. I can't even imagine taking a freshman from high school to senior year. That evolution is a big one. And then at the college level, from freshman to senior year of college is a big evolution as well. You got to it's tricky when you're dealing with big squads. I have, we were actually the smallest team in the country at this level, but I still have, I have 44 kids on my team, and that's a lot of people that you need to connect with. You need to understand them, and you need to figure out what's going to motivate them. And then you have to put all the pieces together. So I think for young coaches, it's a matter of slowing down to speed up. You got to slow down, understand the sport, understand the people, stop thinking about results and going super fast, and just get people rowing. And then by the end of the season, start thinking about racing. I think that's probably some good advice. I don't know. I don't know if I'm the best at advice, but yeah, that would be some of my advice. Yeah.
Well, I love that. I think, like, even that last piece, like taking a step back and like, not getting too focused on outcomes and winning, right? Like I think high school coaches, even college coaches can benefit from that, where it's just, kind of taking that step back and slowing it down and humbling yourself or being open to new information.
The thing
And I
about
think,
it, speed wins, right? So if you just help kids get strong, fit, and fast, you're going to get the results. Speed wins. That's it.
yeah, I love that. And with that, so just, I think one of the things that I would love to hear from you, it's you're, the first, I guess, phase of your coaching career as head coach at Yale, in amazing success, national championships and all these different things. And I'm just curious for you. And obviously, right now, you guys have sustained this competitiveness, and now you're entering as again one of those top teams heading into NCAAs this weekend. But how has women's NCAA rowing evolved? And I'm sure that's different, for coaches out there, whether it's, a coach at an Ivy League program or a coach at, a school, that's more, your traditional Power Five football team type program. They have football teams and all that, scholarships, this and that. But like for you, like just in your eyes, like, and it's all positive and it's really exciting because I'm very excited to go up there this weekend and watch some racing. But how has women's NCAA rowing evolved in your eyes into what today is? Again, like there's the selection show and all this hype around the racing this weekend and the Ivy League championships, a little bit ago. Like, how has all this evolved over your time from head coach in, the late 90s to now here in 2025, for better or for worse, whatever, but like just the evolution of the sport?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to my wife about this yesterday. We were walking, and it's just like every year there's another step, and it just and I guess the steps are more towards becoming a mainstream sport, right? Like so, you look at the athlete development now, and kids entering our program for the most part are very experienced. Even if they just rode domestically here in the U.S. for a high school program, they're coming in at a much higher level than say kids 5, 10, way more advanced than 15 years ago. So their starting point is so much higher physiologically. Technically, some are okay. There's sort of different pieces. When you sit in one of the seats that I'm sitting in, you have kids from around the world, and so the Greek kids row a lot different than the Danish kids, who row a lot different from the British kids, who row a lot different from the Australian kids. Now, cry me a river, right? Because that's my problem. That's not everybody's problem, but point being, you got it. And then high school kids all row different across the United States. They all row different, and so you have to sort of get the technical piece. You have to have a really strong sense of what you are teaching. Okay, this is what we are all doing, and you have to hold to it. And then the thing about teaching rowing is you have to have everything in alignment. It just can't be like, oh, we're going to teach this stroke, and then here we go out and everybody does it. You need to have a drill sequences that reinforce the stroke that you're trying to teach. Not every drill aligns with what you're trying to teach, probably. So you have to use the proper drills that align with what you're trying to teach. You have to have the equipment that aligns with what you're trying to teach, the length oar, the correct boat that aligns with what you're trying to teach. So I guess I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but so the difference is these kids come in at a higher level, and so the rowing is at a higher level. There's a reunion going on right now at Yale, and I had a group from 2010, all those kids who they're women now who won the national championship were riding my launch, watching my current crew, and saying how great they row, and they do. They row a lot better than we rowed back then, and it's just the evolution of the sport. Now, here we go. We're about to go into NIL, and we're about to go into pay to play, and we're about to go into 68 scholarships. And, I've only sat in this chair, so I haven't sat at a school with scholarships. But it does definitely make me a little uneasy, if I'm going to be honest, that we're losing focus on what's at stake here for these kids. Like, this is about education, is it not? This is about, young people coming to a place where they can get an amazing education that's going to serve them for the rest of their lives, whether it's at Yale or any other school. That should be the first step. And I think Sometimes with all the hype about NCAAs and the hype about who's going to be top 5 and who's winning this, and oh, look at this boat kick that boat's, it's just I get it. Everybody wants to treat it like it's, basketball or that it's football. But the thing is, as much as you want to treat it like it's basketball or football, it's not. It's rowing. It's rowing. And the thing about our sport is wonderful is that the sport really teaches the people who participate in it more so than the coaches. If you want to excel at rowing, it's a work sport, and you have to sit in it and you have to do the work. And because it's a racing sport, it rewards speed. So if you don't do the work to get the speed, if you don't build your body, if you're not committed, it's not a sacrifice if you're committed to do it. It's fun if you want to do it. So there's so many great lessons about teamwork, about just setting your course, as taking ownership of your life, that are involved in our sport. And I mean, I love that everybody gets so excited about NCAAs and gets into the hype of everything. But, I think we're doing a disservice if we refer to our kids as athletes first and students second. Every parent out there wants your young adult to have a successful life. And the cornerstone to a successful life, last time I checked, is a solid education. And, that might sound a little preachy, but I never apologize for what we are as a sport. Rowing, in my opinion, is the greatest sport, and it doesn't need to be something that we're not. I think we need to sit in it and cherish what we have and use what we have to help young people, enhance their lives and make their lives better. So I think it's awesome. It's come a long way. It's really exciting. It's a pleasure to be able to coach these athletes and these student athletes at this time. I think that we've kind of pushing it out to the very edge, and I don't want to go off the edge into a place that's kind of not healthy for sport in general in this country and for all participants. I think we're losing just a little bit. We're starting to creep up on the edge of going off the cliff, and I think we should be really wise in these next 3 to 5 years in how we approach it. So that one of the greatest things right now is that there's a little bit of parity, maybe not total parity, but there's some depth. There's, 5, 7, 8 crews, teams that are really can battle. And I would hate to get to a place where it's only 2. And that would be boring for everybody, and also, coaching, we're talking about coaching. I think one of the greatest things about coaching, there's different kinds of coaching. There's managing a roster and just turning over talent. And then there's taking, young athletes and developing those athletes. And that's really where I enjoy it. That's what I love, is seeing young people develop into, grown ass women.
And that actually bridges into kind of my next question for you, as again, like kind of coming back to your background and your experience, and looking at some of the highlights in your time at Yale. And again, this is a testament to the program itself and just to use you while you're here as the coach of that program, the, NCAA championships, the Olympians that have gone off to have success, the countless, I'm sure, alums who, like you said, are coming back and watching the team perform, or practice, before these big regattas and big races. How would you, as a coach, and I think this is you can bridge it off of what you're just talking about with the evolutions of women's rowing, but how would you define, success as a coach in your eyes, right? Like, you can look at the successes of your athletes, you can look at the successes of your team, you can look at what they do off the water, you can look at who they become as people, which I guess is a little bit less of a measurable, kind of stat to look at, but how would you define kind of success for you personally as a coach?
I think, we've talked about this with countless classes that have come through. And, I think, let's count success at your 20th reunion. Let's count success of the impact that you're going to make in this world, on other people. How are you going to enhance this world? Are you going to make it a better place? And how are you going to do that? I think time and time again, like there are going to be races that you remember. There's going to be like that one race that you remember. You aren't going to remember all these races. Come on. We all know that. Like, racing is awesome when you're in it and exciting when you're in it. But 20 years out, when you have a family and kids and a life and a career and there are so many things that are more important. And maybe, just maybe, one or two of those lessons that you learned in our boat bay is going to help carry you through a really tough time in your life, a really stressful time. Maybe, just maybe, the people that you have established relationships with are going to be there for you when you really need them. And, I think those are the things that are important. I think, going fast, absolutely. And I think that success is so multifaceted, and it depends person to person. In the immediate, winning races, absolutely, we want to win races. Like, I've never stood in front of these kids and said we don't want to win. Like, hell yeah, we want to win. That's assumed. You wouldn't be here going through what we do if you didn't want to win. Like, that's an assumed. But what's after that? Like, okay, so you win that race. I've been lucky enough at Yale to have won some big races. What happens the day after? You wake up and you put your shoes on, put your pants on, whatever, and it's just another day. Like, yes, it's changed, it's great, and you can walk around and be like, yeah, I was an NCAA champion, but nothing. You're not getting a coach might get a little performance bump, but the athletes aren't getting anything. Like, maybe they get another T-shirt or something like that. Like, it's not like you're getting $1 million contract. Not in rowing. It's not like it's life-changing money. So why do we do it? We do it because something draws us to it. Something has drawn everybody who's participating in this sport to it, whether it's the beauty of the sport, the work, the grind, whether it's the unity of being part of a team. When's the next time you're going to be a part of 45 women who are all united for one thing? When is that ever going to happen again in your life? So there's a lot of factors that go into success. And I think now more than ever in my coaching career, this world needs good people who are educated and who can make a difference in life. Go out there, whether it's in, become a teacher, become a doctor, become a mom, become whatever, and just have an impact. Just have an impact. Don't sit back and just take. If you come into our boat bay and you just take, we're not going to be successful. You got to give. You have to give. You have to be part of making something better than it was when you walked in. That's the difference. And that, to me, that's where true success lies. Not we want the medals. We get plenty of medals. I think, I don't know. I've been to 24 of 25 NCAA championships for me, right? And I probably learned more from the one I didn't go to. I did than all the ones I've gone to. And for the kids is the same. I think they probably learn more about the tough losses than they're going to take with them about the wins. I think that's what makes you reset. I think human nature is an interesting thing when you study it and watch it. When do people make major changes in their life? Usually when they're forced to, when they have to. Human beings are creatures of comfort. They don't necessarily want to make changes, but when something happens, a divorce, a death, unfortunately, or something tragic, usually catapults people to sit up and take notice and make a change. It's an exceptional individual who can make a change, say, gosh darn it, I'm going to change something about myself and make that change. That's hard to do. And to me, that's, if you come in and you can do that on a micro, on a small part of being an athlete on our team, you carry that forward, that's empowering for the rest of your life. So, yeah.
I know. And I think like there's so much this valuable information that people can run back and re-listen to, because I think that it's a great messaging for coaches out there, for athletes out there. And my follow-up to that would be, how do you as a coach, and this could even be with the other coaches on your staff, but as a collective, as a staff, how do you identify, those different things within athletes who, again, you're putting more of your approach into coaching and to, or you're trying to find people who, can be obviously successful in the moment, but also are good people who, again, will kind of come back and be a part of something bigger than themselves and actually feel something, really positive towards it. Like, how do you, in finding athletes, how do you and your staff kind of find athletes who are in alignment with your vision or messaging your vision to those athletes? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, I think, okay, so we're talking recruiting. So, you ID talent. We ID talent the same way everybody else IDs talent. We go to junior worlds, we go to national championships, we look at, erg scores and everything else. So there are the physical qualities that all Division I athletes have to sort of have these physical qualities. You could be just outside those physical qualities, have the height and stature, but maybe not the erg score. And but you do have the character and you sense that you're going to be able to bring them forward to fit in. But, so we start with that. That's sort of the general parameters. And then, I think in every recruiting class, you can sort of absorb one or two, challenging personalities, knowing that once they get here and they get into the system, the weight of the system is going to make them fall in. And, because the power of the sophomores, juniors, and seniors who understand the system, when the new students come in, they're gonna come into line. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it doesn't. That's the nature of recruiting. It's not always successful. But so you meet these young people, and recruiting is now a 2-year process, and you start having conversations. And, there are certain kids who, in your first conversation, you're just like, okay, we're done with that kid. And then there's other kids who are like, oh, maybe, I don't know. I would say that I defer a lot to my assistant coach, Kristen Wilhelm. She's really good at this. She's better at it than I am. But so, you have multiple conversations, it's not just like one and we offer, so that's why I think recruiting happens at many different levels. Some schools are just helter skelter, rushing to talk to every kid and offer every kid and bring in as many kids as they can, hoping that they get it right. And we've never been that kind of program because we're so small and we want to handpick and move slow. So we will have the initial contact. Usually a phone call gets it started. From the phone call, we'll go to a Zoom call. Then we want to get the parents involved. We want to meet the parents. We don't want the parents to be leading, but we definitely want to meet them because, like it or not, parents have an effect, positive and negative, on the kid. And so some kids' parents are a nightmare, but the kid's a great kid because of their parents are a nightmare. So they're trying to get away. And when they get away from them, they're fine. Some kids, have great parents and are great kids, so it goes all ways, but you have to be aware of what you're dealing with, and you have to have these conversations. And then from multiple Zooms, we bring them to campus, and that's when the team gets involved. Many sets of eyes are important through the process. We take feedback from our current athletes, and we take it, very heavily. Like, we will listen to our current athletes and hear what they say, because they're the ones who are in our program, know what it's going to take, and they give us good feedback. It's very rare that they say, I don't think this kid's going to be too positive for our program, and then we move forward with that kid. Usually if that happens, we're kind of pushing away. I would say in general, kids that are attracted to rowing are usually pretty good kids. There's not a lot of bad kids. I mean, I think the challenge, we don't have a lot of reckless kids. I think the challenge is maybe some kids think they can party more than they really can party. I think that's a common mistake. I think they think they come here and they're just automatically going to get fast. They don't realize they make themselves fast. I think the most unfortunate one for me is, when kids are super selfish and they just cannot handle that they're not selected. They can't get past themselves and realize, like, yeah, it's about the team. And, if you're really good and maybe you could fit in the varsity, but the team's better if you stroke in the 2V, then maybe you should stroke the 2V this year. I had a captain 2 years ago who was a coxswain, and she coxed our 2V in her senior year, and because she was really good in that seat, and she made a really positive impact on our team in that seat. And, I think being mature enough to know that you're going to do what's right for the team is a hard thing for some kids. So, but it's not a fast process. It's a slow process. I think some schools, here's what I don't like when schools do. They put a kid on an exploding offer. Like I've had more kids come to me and say, are you going to support me? Because I got to know, because X school has told me I have 2 weeks to decide and I don't want to lose that chance at that school. So are you going to support me? I'm like, I'm not working to X school's timetable. You can tell them to go, do what they got to do, but we're going to move slow and steady through this and really take our time and see that you're going to work. Because when you get here, the adult that you're going to deal with more than any adult at this university, your coaching staff. You're going to see us twice a day, almost every day, 6 days a week, 5 days a week. You're going to see your favorite professor 2 days a week, at most, one semester. You're not going to see any other adults. Like, we are it, and you're either going to be with us or you're not going to fit, and that's the challenge. So it's fun, because I like it, because I get to meet all these people, and you get to see them, their starting point. Okay, they're coming in the program here, and every kid comes in at a different starting point. You bring in 10 recruits and you got 10 different starting points. That doesn't mean that's going to be where they finish. That's exciting, watching the growth.
And bridging off that, a question I'd love to kind of follow up with on the recruiting and identifying talent, and athletes that you do want to bring in who are the right fit, both in terms of their skill sets and their, again, their ability to move the boat and perform, but also their fit in terms of just the culture fit with the team and making sure they're the right fit on that front. But kind of two-part question here, but just explain a little bit for you guys as much as you can, or as much as you would like to, but just how you kind of filter through, because with Yale, I'm sure, and maybe your assistant coaches can probably speak even more to this, because they probably handle a lot of those kind of entry emails. But it's a school for its resident, or for the school that it is, attracts a lot of people who are very interested in the rowing program, but even more so probably the school itself, right? Being at Yale and an Ivy League and a very established university. When you're thinking about that kind of initial phase, okay, well, you have the ERG scores, you have for you guys as you recruit internationally, you have international results, you have results at big regattas, you might have rowing film, maybe prior background, what sports they did, this and that. I'm curious about that initial phase of recruiting, and then also how much development is taken into consideration if it is a 2-year process from their kind of, I guess, started the recruiting process, before their junior year begins that summer, to when, you're officially confident that, hey, this is an athlete that we can bring in. Like, is there a period of development that you're looking for in that phase where it's like, okay, well, they're a junior at this point, by the time they're halfway through their junior year, okay, now we're comfortable with this decision. And I'm sure it's different for every athlete, but shed some light on that, because I feel like that's something that a lot of athletes, parents, coaches are kind of curious about, because a lot of noise is surrounded by June 15th rolls around. I got to have every email sent, and I got to talk to all these coaches, and I got to make my decision by June 16th or else I'm behind. Like, I feel like that's something that people just, it floods into the ecosystem of recruiting. Shed some light on your guys' process for that filtration plus kind of development phase.
Yeah. So this is Kristen's job, and this is interesting. So I'll back up a little bit. I have 2 assistant coaches, Kristen and Jamie. And Jamie's been with me since 2005, and Kristen graduated from Yale in 2014, coached a bit as a volunteer at University of Washington men, and then was at Indiana with Steve Peterson for, I think, 5 years, and then has been here. She's in her 3rd season here. 3rd, yeah. And so she's now, every head coach has to decide how they're going to manage recruiting. And so I figured this out about 10 years into my head coaching, that I need to hire one person who's going to just recruit. And so Kristen pretty much just recruits. She also coaches. She was a coxswain. She coaches our 3rd varsity 8. But her priority, if there's a conflict, like, do I go to some regatta, the Munich regatta, or do I sit here and coach? You're going to recruit. And so her priority, her job is all recruiting. And so Kristen deals with everything. So we have on our webpage, like everybody else, a recruiting questionnaire. And I would say on average, we get 5 to 10 questionnaires filled out a day coming through. They click up in our email boxes. And, I would say 75% of them are probably way off the mark. Somebody who just is taking a flyer, filling out the Yale thing. And I feel for those kids because I think they don't have guidance, or, their high school coach is not telling them that an 830 erg score at 5'5" is not going to be right now. That's not saying never, because I would never say never on a kid ever. And I learned that early. But right. So that's sort of, we get those. And Kristen goes through those. We open those. We both open them daily. I open them and she opens them. And, if there's a kid, if it catches my eye, I'll make note of it to her. So she manages our database, and our database is just what you would imagine it is. It's a spreadsheet, it's done on a program, and we both have all three coaches have access to it, and we can fill in and delete and move and all that stuff. So it's like a Google share, and that has we in-house break it into three categories: A list, B list, C list, and then we have more categories, but we won't get into those categories. But they're not bad; they're just other categories. And so every kid's kind of different. You have kids that have all the physical tools, but maybe the academics are slightly off. You have kids who definitely have the academics, but physical tools are a little shy. You have the kids that are sort of in the medium, sort of have both both the tools and medium academics. So every case is different. We have to look at every kid and we have to sift through. And so that's her job. Yes, she goes, so much of recruiting is done online. Like you do have to travel and you do have to put on the Yale shirt and go stand there and talk to kids. But, you can get the Munich regatta results. You can get the world's results. You just saw European results for just this past weekend. You can get the European results. You can get every high school in the U.S.'s results, and a lot of the high school coaches in the U.S. are very welcoming. If you call them or email them and say, who are your top 5 kids, they'll tell us because they want to help their kids. So we do all of that, and that's sort of the initial gathering, and then the filtering. And the filtering for us at Yale is the physical tools and the academics. And if they have both those, they get put over here. If they have one of those, they get put here, and they have neither of those, they get put over there. And then from there, we start contacting. And when we contact, we kind of break it into groups. And, there's probably 25 kids that we deal with are in our top tier. And, we start the process. And, I think it's like you get 25% of what we go after at the end, so of those kids we're recruiting, we know that some are going to pick other schools, and that's their loss. But I say that kiddingly, but kids are going to decide I'm going to X, Y, or Z, and then there's other kids that come here. But it doesn't move fast. It's very slow. To your point, there are kids that we are like, okay, this kid has the academics. Maybe she's sitting at a 7. She's 6 foot tall. And she's thin, and she's at a program that's, a small program, excuse me. And, she's sitting at a 740 erg score as a junior, and you say, okay, let's track this kid. Okay. She just popped us. She's down to 730. Okay. Let's keep tracking her. She's trending. Let's talk to the coach now. Okay. The coach says she's rowing the erg 3 days a week, where she was rowing the erg 1 day a week. Now she's rowing it 3 days a week. Okay. Let's give her another month or two and then see again. Oh, wow, this kid's now down to 720, 25. Okay, this kid's coming. Here we go. And remember, we're talking kids in our sport, because rowing is a weight-bearing sport. It's not swimming. It's a weight-bearing sport. So when I say that, it requires strength. And even the ones that are starting at 18, their physical strength by the time they leave at, say, 22 is very different, just through maturity. And so the difference between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old is a lot. And so you're going to see kids pop. and go. But so I think once a kid sort of hits a threshold, we sense, okay, this kid, if we bring this kid into our system, our training, we've talked to her, we know she has a good, solid work ethic. She's going to be a good kid. She's going to come in and engage in our process. Let's go. And so that's sort of how we eventually get there. But I think it's important for high school kids to think of, when they think about recruiting, you should never think of it as a way to get into college. That's not what it is. You should think of it because you love rowing and you want to row at the next level. And I would tell every recruit, the first thing you should do, and this is what I told my three grown kids, is get really good grades. Because if you get really good grades, you'll have a lot more options about where you can go to college than if you don't get good grades. So, if you want options, get good grades. And rowing in college is truly about school. It's about, you got to go to school, and you're not just going to go row. You got to go to school and row. And I would say start in the classroom, then in the erg room, then on the water. And if you still love it, then start thinking about rowing in college. But you got to love it.
Yeah, I think that's like, I so many people, again, like I think, and you might identify this early in a conversation where it is about, or, I don't want to say so many people, but again, you do have those people who it's more about the allure of rowing rather than like, are they really that passionate about it? Are they really that, are they in love with every aspect of it, the training and the sport itself and all those different variables that go into it? And where does the erg fit in to, you've alluded to it, you referenced it. And I think it'd just be great to hear from someone like yourself, with your coaching background and experience. Where does the erg fit in? And even more so when you're talking about the athletes who maybe are beyond or, not at that international stage or where they're competing at the biggest regattas that maybe are, in those programs that, they're trying to kind of make a name for themselves within a program that maybe is a little bit more intermediate in terms of where they're traveling. Like where does the erg and even the height and the size, the tangible qualities fit in?
So this is where I talk about an athlete, Ashley Brzozovich. So my second year, it was actually my first year as a head coach. Ashley Brzozovich came for a visit, and in the fall. And, I think you have kids back then. This is a long time ago, and mind you, this is 99, 2000. So it was a fall of 99. She comes for a visit to Yale. And it was one of those kind of, well, I don't think it was an official visit. I think she was on an unofficial visit. She's out of Chicago. She's from Chicago, but she's a Canadian. So she had dual citizenship. And Brzaz is riding in the back seat of my launch, probably because I had some other kid who rode on the U.S. junior team sitting beside me. And so I'm not really paying attention to Brzaz. I'll be the first to admit it. I didn't give her much, attention, much love. So that happened in the fall. Okay, nice to meet you. See you later. She goes home. Then in the spring, Brzaz reaches out and says, "Hey, I got into Yale on my own. I was wondering if you could talk about coming." And so I call her up and I say, "Hey," and this is true. I didn't really remember her. I say, "Well, remind me who you are." And so she tells me, "I'm Ashley Brzozovich. I'm from Chicago." I say, "Oh, that's cool. So how fast are you going on the erg right now?" And she goes, "Well, back up. When she sat in the back of my launch, she was going like 750 on the erg." She goes, "Well, I'm going 715 in the spring." She goes, "Well, I'm going 715. I said, "Oh, okay. Well, yeah, let's fly you down." So we flew her down, and Brzaz, turns out to be, she became a 3-time Olympian. She rode in the Canadian 8. She got a silver medal, and she left Yale going sub 750, or excuse me, sub 650. And right there, I was like, I asked her. I said right away, when on that official visit, I said, "Well, how'd you get so fast on the erg?" And this is classic high school kid. She goes, "Oh, I just decided I wanted to go fast, so I started training. So right away the bell goes off and goes, okay, we're not recruiting off of erg scores anymore. You got to figure out the kid. Like, where's the kid? Like, has this kid even trained? Like, Brazaz was an amazing athlete, and I would have just blown right. And I did. I blew right by her, and I missed her because she didn't have the bells and whistles of an erg score. So for us, yeah, we use the erg as a parameter just like anyone else. But the erg, there's a story behind every number. The kids from a small program who barely touch the erg, touch it twice a week or something like that, they really don't have a sense of it. A kid who rose, excuse me, in one of these Connecticut high school programs up here, in Fairfield County, the trifecta of Rye, Greenwich, Saugatuck, like those kids that row on the erg like they're in college. Like they're training on the erg. So you're going to see those scores. But the question is, do you want to recruit a kid who's going 7:15 and comes through your door and leaves going 7:12? Because they're fully developed out of high school. Or do you want to recruit a kid who's going 7:35 and leaves going 6:50? So we learned early on, like, okay, contact the kid, hear the story, find out what they do. Okay, so how do you train? How many meters do you do a week? Like, what's the volume you're doing? Do you play any other sports? Are you doing a fall sport? Like, one of our best first-year athletes is Grace Murphy out of Episcopal Academy, and she's here as a first-year athlete. She played field hockey in the fall, for Molly Konopka, and then she swam in the winter and she rode in the spring. The kid's great. She's great. She's going to be amazing, and she's right on the trajectory that we would want her to be coming in. So you got to find out the kid's story. The erg absolutely will open a door for you. If you have a big score and put it in front of coaches, you'll get all the calls. If you don't, then you have to make it a point to send an email, contact, establish contact, and if you can, get your story out there to the coaches. That's that.
I love that. That's a great thing for athletes, because I think a lot of times it is that, hey, I get the email back, I'm only recruiting 7:30 or below, and then all of a sudden they're they drop off they're like, okay, well, this school I can never be at, and this and that. So I think you highlighting the fact that, like, the story does matter behind that, and your ability to navigate that path and get your story in front of the coaches, can go a long ways, because it is an important piece to what our sport is all about, which any college coach will say, with its ability to measure rowing specific fitness. But with that, Coach, I want to be conscious of your time. I got two more questions for you before we wrap things up. I know that you are in a very busy week, obviously, for prepping for this weekend, but I want to bring it to Yale specifically, and your program. And one of my final questions for you is what makes Yale unique? What makes Yale rowing unique? And again, this could bridge into the university itself. Obviously, you've been there, you know it better, as good as anyone. But what makes Yale rowing unique in your eyes? You highlighted it's a smaller program, and maybe that's kind of purposeful for you guys and how you want to run it. But what makes your program, what makes the Yale program, the Yale women's program, unique and special in your eyes?
Well, I think Yale is an amazing place. I've had so many amazing people come through my team. It's a place that attracts, I wouldn't say greatness, but people who aspire to be great, right? It attracts high achievers. So on its surface, like, those are people who are drawn to Yale are not drawn to the easy path. Coming here is about, we're not, this always comes off wrong. It's not a slight against other places, but we're not a scholarship school where maybe you're going to take a softer academic load. We are a school where you're going to take top end academics and we're going to train at the top end. So, I think it's very unique in those two things combined. And it is very much one of a kind in that. And I think because of the institution, because of what's behind it, the alumni connections, just the history of this place, I think it then gives its graduates amazing opportunity. What they do with that opportunity is up to them. but the amount of opportunity that's waiting on the other side of graduation from here is amazing. You know, I always kind of chuckle when people are talking about recruiting and like, oh, this kid's going to get paid, you know, you're going to get $24,000 in stipend for going to this school. That's great for 4 years. Then what? Because if you come out of this place, you know, your earning power for the rest of your life is crazy. And if you utilize it, you know, there's certainly people who don't utilize it and they don't choose to. But if you want true, lasting, life-changing, you know, education is the key to success in this world of ours. You know, I think it's such a fast-paced world and so much is at your fingertips, but being able to sift through it and be educated is really empowering for young people. You know, so there's that. I think the history here is remarkable. You know, it's the birthplace of collegiate rowing for those people who don't know. You know, it started at Yale in 1852 and the Yale Harvard race. And then we have a really historic women's program as well that did some major things in Title IX in the early days. They're a real player in Title IX in the early days. Without getting into it too much, I'll let people research that on their own. But Yale Women's Crew is at the forefront of Title IX and changing the path for women's sports, all women's sports going forward. And it's because of the power of the team here. And those women who did that are still very actively involved in the program. So the history of the place, the opportunity waiting upon graduation, and, you know, all these programs that, you know, kids have all these different programs and you interview all these collegiate coaches. And, you know, I was looking, I saw some of them, you know, the final piece of the puzzle is the chef, right? Is right here. Like if you like this, then you come. If you want to work with somebody else, you know, there's plenty of options. And it's really what fits best for you as a young person, you know, what aligns well with your character and your aspirations. If you're one-dimensional, don't come here. You know, if you just are one-dimensional, don't come here. If you're multi-dimensional, multifaceted, and excited, you know, about endless opportunity, then let's go. And I, as a coach, I'm very comfortable putting high expectations on our athletes, both in the classroom and on the water. Like, I'm not uncomfortable with that. And when I say that, like, sure, every coach says that sounds great, but the practice means you have to balance, and you have to be willing as a coach to balance the training program, balance the requirements of, you know, the time requirements that you have for your athletes to allow them to excel in the classroom. It's a give and take. It's not just one-sided. And that's super important as well. So, you know, I think when you do a Google search of all these schools, you know, you click up their wins and losses and you see all that stuff. But I would say you talk to recruits from around the country, this place, and internationally, and you ask them who won the NCAAs last year. None of them know. They don't freaking know. They don't know because they're not following the sport like that. Like, yeah, the odd kid knows because they have a friend at X school or because they have a sibling that's rowing, but the majority of them don't know. They'll tell you who won like junior worlds, or they'll tell you who won their high school championship, but they don't know what's going on in college. And so I think it's a huge decision. I love it when parents say, oh, she's going to make the decision. Like, when was the last time you let your kid make a $300,000 decision or a $400,000? Oh, she's going to make the decision. That's not true. That's not true. It's a family decision, and it comes down to what aspirations you have for your kid and what aspirations they have and what fits best. But yeah, Yale is a unique place that combines both things at a high level and truly does. Everybody says that, but Yale truly does. Yeah.
Oh man, that's this is awesome. And Coach, I mean, yeah, that was just a really good way to kind of describe it, and a place that you've been at for so long. But last thing, I know you got to run, but last piece of advice for athletes who are going through this process, or whether they're a sophomore, junior, like, and they're thinking about college rowing, they want to compete at a high level, they're trying to figure out where they want to go, both academically and athletically. Just your advice for people in navigating that process as they just get started for any athlete out there. Let's end with that, and we'll wrap things up there. But yeah, general advice for them?
Yeah. I would say, like I said earlier, starts in the classroom, like get your academics in order. I think so many freshmen in high school are immature and young and get off on the wrong foot. And yeah, it's okay. You'll be forgiven for that year, but then you got to start trending and you got to sort of start working. I honestly think, and I saw this with my own kids, junior year of high school is the hardest academic year you will have, even if you go on and get a PhD. I just think that the grind, if you're doing it at a high level, is really hard. And so you have to know that and be willing to do the work, first off, in the classroom. Second off, I would say the rowing front, you got to love it. Like, you got to love it. You got to love rowing in the rain. You got to love rowing in the snow. You got to love rowing in the heat. You got to just love being out on the water. That doesn't mean that every day is a great day. You got to love that every day is not a great day. I think our sport as a work sport sort of requires a grind that's not for everybody. It's just not. And so I would never look at rowing as a way to get into one of these universities. I would look at rowing, if you really love this sport and you're drawn to it and you want to keep going, then listen to your coaches, start training, do some research. There's plenty of information on the internet about how to write a training program, get a base level understanding of physiology and how to train, and start training. The funny thing is, like, my older two kids were swimmers, and nobody thinks anything about putting kids in the pool at age 9, right? Okay, you're going to be on the swim team. I was watching my kids at age 9 and 10 swim 2-hour practices. It's like, well, how hard can this be, right? And I went and tried to do it, in the Yale pool, and I was like, oh, this is okay. So I tried it for like 6 months before I finally gave up. So nobody thinks anything about training young swimmers. And what does swimming do? Swimming develops physiology. It develops your physiology and some of the key ages, like from age as early as 9 or 10 until like 15, 16. It develops massive physiology. Nobody would ever think about, in this country, would think about sicking a kid out in a single and start training them at that age. But training can start, if it's age appropriate, at a very young age. It doesn't have to be weight bearing on the erg. You shouldn't be lifting weights until you really have stopped growing. You really should wait until get that right, because I see a lot of injuries with that. But be a student of the sport, learn how to train, and train because you love to train. And I would say, don't just train rowing specific, like cycle, swim, climb a mountain, run, like get outside and just start thinking about being physical and enjoying sport and enjoying, if you play 3 sports, that's awesome. Play all 3 and pour yourself into it. Kids ask me, should I play my last year of high school basketball or should I row? I'm like, no way, play basketball. You're never going to get a chance to do that again. Play it and go have an awesome time. So I would start in the classroom, and then I would understand my sport. And if it's my passion, then I would pursue it. And if you want to get recruited and you're in rowing, you got to be fast. And so there's one way to get fast, as the great Mike Tatey would say. If you want to be fast on the erg, what do you need to do? Row the erg. Like, row it when you're old enough. Get it going and start rowing the erg, and you'll get your number. It's not hard. It's kind of basic. Just sit on there and just row the erg if you want to be good at it. And you get your number, and then you got your grades, you got your number, and then let's go. You're the package. That's how you get there.
Man, that's awesome. That's a great way to wrap things up. I want to be conscious of your time, but that's some great advice for anyone to run back and listen to again. And again, this was super valuable, the whole conversation. And if we had another 2 hours, we'd probably have no issues taking it, because again, this was some really valuable stuff for anyone out there. But Coach Porter, again, I appreciate you coming on, especially in what is the big week of the season, or another big week of the season, but just, the end of the season, obviously. But again, this was a blast. Thank you so much for coming on. Good luck this weekend. I'll be up there floating around watching some racing as well, so maybe we'll bump into each other. But again, this was an absolute blast, and I appreciate you taking the time.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, go Yale.
Awesome. Go Yale.